Hey everybody, Who's Your Jedi here with another review for you. This time I'm talking episode 1 of season 2 of Arrow called City of Heroes. Alright, the show is back and it's really, really good. I mean, I really did not have any doubt this show would not disappoint me, but it's so good. So good when a show lives up to your expectations. And there's a lot of really good stuff going on here. Out of everything I've seen on TV this new season so far, this has been the one that's really got me the most pumped. So let's just kind of get right into things. So after I watched this episode, I went out and kind of poked around, as I sometimes do, just to sort of see what other people's reactions to what things were going on were. And that can basically be summed up in one word: Alicity! Okay, let me be clear here that I don't do shipping. I really don't. I don't really have anything against people who are into it, but it's just not my thing. Okay? Now remember, the thing we have to remember about Felicity is that she was not intended to be a major character. I don't think was even really supposed to appear more than one time, but she just really knocked people's socks off, and people just kind of fell in love with the character, the fans and the writers both. And of course, people were very much into her and Oliver last season. Well, the writers have heard you folks who dig this sort of thing, and this episode makes it abundantly clear that they are going to have you're going to have plenty of fun little tidbits thrown your way. Who knows exactly how it's all going to play out, but the desires of the fandom have been heard. And yeah, let's just leave it at that. Anyway, now I definitely did like that we pick up on Lian Yu. I mean, it really does make perfect sense that of anywhere in the world after this that Oliver would go, that he would go there. It's his way of punishing himself, of trying to kind of reconnect with that part of his life, the part of his life that made him stronger. And you got to think that after everything that happened in the last episode, Oliver's got to be feeling just about anything but strong right now. And of course, we get the nice moment of Felicity taking note of the Deathstroke mask with the arrow on it. One of the first things we saw in Season 1, now one of the first things we see in Season 2. Obviously, that's going to be very important at some point. When? We don't know. But we do know that on the island, some things are going to go very, very badly wrong. And it's always interesting when things go very, very badly wrong on a show with writing of this caliber. Anyway, of course, this whole thing with Oliver going back to the island, well, this sort of raises the question: when he was rescued in the episode 1 of the series, was that the first time that Oliver had left the island? And this is something that people have been wondering for a long time. I mean, how did he end up with that Bratva tattoo after all? Where did he learn to speak Russian? So, and if that's the case, then did something happen during that time that caused Oliver, some other horrible tragedy in his life that caused Oliver to choose to willingly go back to Lian Yu? Is this when we see this episode, him going back there of his own free will for the second time? Something to think about. Anyway, let's kind of get right into things. So once we get Oliver back to Starling City, one of the first things we see is the whole vote for blood thing, which sounds horribly, horribly disturbing. And of course, I don't think this episode. This is one part of the episode where I think things could have been better done. Is that they don't make it quite clear that Laurel's new boss, the alderman, Sebastian Blood, is the guy that people are talking about with that whole vote for blood thing. Now, granted, there's a lot of stuff going on here, but I think that if you haven't been reading like the press releases about this upcoming season, like I have, that's the sort of thing that you would probably miss. And Sebastian Blood is obviously a riff on a character from the comics, but I'll save talking about that until we get to see a little bit more of him, because this really just doesn't seem like the place to go into an in-depth discussion about him, given that he's such a minor character at this point. Now, another thing that we see this episode is a mention of Central City and a particle accelerator. And if you've been paying attention to what the show has officially said is going to be coming down the pipe this season, you all know what that's leading up to, especially if you're a fan of the comics. But again, that's not an element I really think that we need to get into right now. So since with that said, let's move in and start talking a little bit about what's going on with our characters. So we might as well talk about Thea first. And I have to say, first of all, how in the name of God did Thea get the legal authority to just take over Oliver's club? I mean, did Walter kind of help her with that? Because as near as I could tell, Thea was still in high school last season. I guess she must have been a senior or something, because now she's legally an adult and can run a bar, just not drink in one. So, given that the drinking age in America is 21, yeah, it only makes sense that she is now 18 years old. And one other thing that I do have to criticize this episode is that whole bit where Thea says to Roy, I control both your job and your sex life. Okay, writers, I'd like you to pause for a moment and imagine people's reaction if a male character, even jokingly, had said that to a female character, even one who was his girlfriend. That's torches and pitchforks on the internet sort of thing. But here, it's just ha ha! Yeah. Not exactly helping the whole the genders are supposed to be equal here. Alright? You're not helping there, guys. Come on. That is kind of a dickish thing for Thea to say, even if she is just saying it jokingly. But, whatever. Roy's not the kind of guy who's going to be offended by this. Now, Roy, though, tying him into Thea, what I like about this is, one, Roy seems to have gained a good bit of decent sense since we last saw him. He's obviously still going out there, still doing his own vigilante thing, but he's thinking the situations through a little bit more. I guess almost dying in the glades finally got through his head. Of course, now he's also got Thea to worry about, and that really gives him a pretty good reason for living. But what's really great about Roy this episode is that his emotional maturity, I guess, is what I'm looking for. He sees through what's going on with Thea really clearly. He sees that Thea is trying to punish her mother, but in the process, all Thea is doing is really hurting herself. And we get a little bit more insight into what's going on with Roy. The episode does seem to heavily imply that his parents are both dead. And I really did like that little speech that he gave to her, that, like, yeah, even though I kind of hate my parents, I still wish that I could talk to them. And, he does raise a good point. Thea has lost her father. Her mother is in really dire straits, and Thea is really just harming herself by refusing to talk to Moira. And of course, this all leads into that absolutely fantastic scene between Thea and Moira towards the end of the episode, where Thea goes in there and says, I want to hate you, but I can't. You're my mom. I love you. I mean, wow, guys. I mean, that was just beautiful. And of course, we also get to see another side to Moira early on when Oliver goes and talks to her. Obviously, we see that, she's still this caring person, this person who is very, very sorry for the dark things that she's done. But still, Moira is a smart and formidable woman, and she understands what Oliver is there for very quickly, and she's got Isabel Rochoff pegged. But actually, going back to Thea, what happens with Thea when she gets kidnapped? You see, this This I love. This is something that's right out of the old Joss Whedon playbook. And if you've read, I'm a big Joss Whedon fan. I love the dude. I don't love everything he's ever done, but I do love Joss as a writer. He's a guy that if you want to know how to write and write well, he's well worth studying and reading his interviews and what he says about writing and all this other stuff. And one thing that he said that I've always stuck in my mind is that to tell a good story, one thing you need to do is figure out what your characters want and then give it to them. But give it to them in the worst way possible. Now, if you watch Buffy the Vampire Slayer or Angel, you can see many examples of that. Angel wants his soul back. Buffy wants to have Angel get his soul back. And at the end of what was it? Season 2. Yeah, Season 2, that happens. Angel gets his soul back. Right as Buffy has to send him to hell in order to save the world. It's beautiful. Beautiful. They both got what they wanted in the worst way possible. And here, Thea getting kidnapped. Being forced to just flat literally say what had to have been going through her mother's mind, forcing herself to be in her mother's shoes and think about what she must have felt, how she must have struggled to make the decisions that she did, knowing that Thea was really all that Moira had left besides Walter. So Thea comes to her understanding of her mother, but in the worst possible way, under the worst possible circumstances. Good stuff there. Good stuff. I don't really have a huge amount to say about what's going on with Laurel here. One, I definitely did like that they reminded us that Laurel is capable of fighting when she needs to. She's obviously not on Oliver's caliber. She's obviously cannot stand up to China White or anybody like that, but she can handle herself all right in a basic fight. Now, obviously, this is something that's going to become pretty important later on, but what else is going on with Laurel is, one, she says some stuff about, sleeping with Oliver that definitely needed to be said after the events of last season. And I love how Oliver and Laurel are actually taking a pretty reasonably mature attitude towards this. Oliver even says to her at the end, "I understand why we can't be together, but I don't want you to not be in my life." And that's great. You see, one thing that I really hate in storytelling is the idea that men and women just can't be friends. Now, granted, it's really much more complicated than a standard friendship between Oliver and Laurel. And, of course, there's the whole ultimate destiny of Green Arrow and Black Canary, and all the history that's associated with that. But, as much as they've had their ups and downs in the comics, Green Arrow and Black Canary here are people who were always willing to be there for each other, even when they didn't really like each other that much. That's just the sort of bond that they shared. And that's what really made those two such an interesting pair. Now, another thing we have is we've got the standard, my love interest hates my superhero vigilante side, and it is vowed to bring them to justice. Gosh, we've seen that 100 times in the comics, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's basic drama, superhero drama 101, but it works. It always works. So you can hardly blame the show for, doing what works. Now, another thing that's very much out of the standard superhero playbook is if a hero goes away for a while. They come back, there's an imposter running around, or there's some copycats and things like that. I mean, we even saw this in the one Batman movie with Christian Bale. I'm not the one wearing hockey pads. Christian Bale, what in the name of God were you thinking with that Batman voice? I know I'm not the first person to say that, but really. Anyway, there's just so many examples of all of this in superhero comics. Like when Superman was killed, he came back. There were 4 different Supermen, or people claiming to be Superman, basically running around. When Batman had his back broken, he had to deal with the vigilante Azrael, who had essentially taken up the mantle of Batman and proceeded to completely and utterly lose his mind. And yeah, that was some interesting stuff. So now we see Oliver having to deal with the Hoods, this gang of vigilantes who have risen to take the Hoods' place. And what's interesting about the Hoods is that while Oliver is trying to go on to a better place, trying to take the higher path, the Hoods are essentially all that was wrong with what Oliver was doing in Season 1 distilled down into these 4 people. They were willing to try and kill Oliver, even though Oliver had really not done anything wrong. He was just the son of the wrong people. And Thea was the daughter of the wrong people. And let's not forget that these guys also murdered the mayor of the city. They murdered police officers who were just trying to do their job. These guys had completely lost anything that was good about what Oliver was doing as a vigilante just to satisfy a desire for revenge. There was no heroic motive to what these guys were doing. There were only rationalizations. These guys just wanted to go out and hurt people as a way of dealing with their losses and their pain. And the fact that Oliver aspired even somewhat to something better, and that he learned that he could not go around and do and kill these people without consequence, that's what made Oliver different. It's what we said in this episode, that he can't continue going on being the Hood. He can't go around just crossing names off a list, looking to avenge his father. He has to do something better. He has to aspire to something better. It can't be about the list anymore. It can't be about his father anymore. It has to be about honoring Tommy, about trying to redeem himself, about trying to get away from that awful moment, that awful knowledge that his best friend, the closest thing in this world that Oliver Queen ever had to a brother, died thinking that he was a murderer. He has to be the man that Tommy thought he could be. Everything has to be about honoring Tommy's memory. And honoring something good. Keeping something good in your heart. That is part of what makes the difference between a hero and a vigilante. Look at Batman. What does Batman keep in his heart? At his core, through so many of the interpretations, through so many writers, the thing that Batman wants is to not let anyone else suffer the sort of loss that he did. He does not want another child, another person, to have to sit there in that cold, dark alley and stare at the bodies of the people that they love. More than anything else, that is what drives Batman. That is why Batman reveres life. Sure, it would be so much easier just to throw the Joker off a building and be done with it. But if he did that, then Batman, Bruce Wayne, would be throwing away everything that his parents had taught him. He would be dishonoring their memory. And that's why Batman is a hero, because he walks that higher path. He makes that harder choice. He makes that morally superior choice. And Season 1 was all about getting Oliver to that point in this episode where he realizes, this is the choice I need to make. I need to walk this higher path. Now, I don't think this means that Oliver's never going to kill anybody ever again. I don't think he's going to have that luxury. But Oliver now understands just how precious life can be, and just how much it costs him on so many levels if he does take a life. Every time he takes a life, he is in some way dishonoring Tommy's memory. And I don't think that's something Oliver is going to do lightly. Pontificating is thirsty work, folks. It really is. And anyway, getting back to more classic heroic stuff. The whole thing with handcuffing the hoods to a fence and turning them over to the nearest cop who just happens to be Officer Lance. Oh, that's pure Batman. That's pure Batman, pure Spider-Man, just classic comic book vigilante stuff. I love that. Not really a whole lot to say about what's going on with Lance this episode. He's been demoted. He's basically back out working the streets. But here, where he has that moment, where where the Hood even tells him, "I'm trying a different path," or "I'm trying something new." Well, while Laurel is pushing the Hood away, here we see an opportunity for the Hood and her father to become closer. Quentin and Laurel changing places. Dramatic, ironic, iconic. I'm going to stop talking like that. Anyway, I don't really have a lot to say about Isabel Rolchov. I mean, it's certainly cool to see Summer Glau. Seeing her on Arrow will perhaps help me kind of shake in my head, constantly thinking that she's the one playing that girl, playing Skye over on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., even though I know that's not right. Joss Whedon... Is it just me, or does Joss Whedon seem to have just a bit of a type, huh? Anyway... speaking of her, towards the end of this episode, when she says, if you try and buy that remaining 5% of stock, we'll sue you into the poorhouse. On what grounds? Last time I checked, it was perfectly legal to try and buy stock in the United States of America. I mean, the way this makes any sense is that if they basically say that they're going to find some BS excuse to drag Oliver into court over this and just keep it going until he exhausts all of his money in lawyers' fees. But again, that's really, really stretching it. I mean, if Oliver does one way or the other legally get his hands on that, then it just doesn't really make sense. And frankly, if you wanted to do that to Oliver, why didn't you just come up with some BS excuse and have him in court already, draining his money? Then he would be forced to sell his shares, which, if last I checked, he has something like, 50% of the shares? 45%? Whatever? Yeah, it was 45% at the beginning of the episode. Then do that. Do that. I mean, he's the son of Moira Queen, who has to be the most hated person in America at this point. Certainly, at least in Starling City. I mean, aren't there going to be a line of people around the block trying to sue him? And you guys know what the heck I'm talking about. This makes no sense. This threat is complete and utter BS. Although it does lead to a very cool moment for Walter. And frankly, I'm hoping we'll see more of Walter. I kind of like the idea that Walter is the guy that Oliver would go to when he needs that fatherly moment, that fatherly guidance. And there's just a simple fact that Walter is a cool character. I'm certain that Thea isn't going to complain about having him around, and I definitely want to see more about what his relationship is like with Moira at this point. There's still quite a bit of character stuff to do with Walter, and of course he and Felicity get along great. Well, we're definitely going to be seeing more of Felicity. Why not spend some time dealing with her relationship with Walter? Sounds really cool to me. Anyway, getting back to some stuff. One thing I forgot to mention in regards to Moira, that line about how you freed me. Oh man, I love that. That's gorgeous, gorgeous writing there. Anyway, there's one more thing that we have to talk about, and that is, of course, Black Canary. Now, first of all, is it just me, or did you notice in that scene when Roy was saving that woman from the thugs? Apparently she was a waitress. It looks like she was actually wearing a Big Belly Burger uniform. So I'm wondering if this might not lead to us getting to spend some more time with Carly, Dig's sister-in-law, or ex-sister-in-law / possible romantic interest. Again, that's something interesting and cool to do with Dig, and I'm certainly not going to complain if that's what happens. But anyway, so Black Canary is on the scene. Obviously, she's not being played by Katie Cassidy. This is some other different actress who, in my typical fashion, whose name I cannot recall. But yeah, she certainly does kick quite a bit of butt, and I love how she disappears off screen. There's just the special effect sound of what sounds like a bird cry, obviously intended as a nod to the famous canary cry, the superpower, the sonic scream that Black Canary occasionally did have in the comics. I think these days she's mostly considered to not have it, and she's just considered, a serious badass martial artist. But yeah, very, very cool there. And of course raises the possibility that Olive that Roy wants to follow in the footsteps of the vigilante. Well, maybe he will do that, but maybe the vigilante whose footsteps he ends up following is not going to be the Hood. And of course, if Oliver is choosing the path of the hero, well, he's obviously probably not going to be too fond of there being a full-on vigilante roaming around the city. Honestly, the only problem that I can really foresee with Black Canary at this point is that people are going to confuse her with China White, because I've already seen that from someone who apparently can't tell the difference between a Caucasian woman and an Asian woman. I mean, okay, granted, the hair is a little bit of a mitigating factor, but seriously? Anyway, guys, that's all I got for you this time. As always, please comment, rate, and subscribe, and of course you can follow me on Twitter at Hoosier Jedi. Till next time.